Good afternoon, all. Good afternoon. Welcome to another edition of Let's Be Clear with Senator James Sanders Jr., yours truly. Now, my friends, in a day and age of fuzzy thinking, in a day and age where everybody's all over the place and you can't get a straight answer if you had a straight coin, I mean, it's just hard out here. Everybody's got to equivocate. Everybody's got to figure five ways, but no, we don't do that here. Here we cut through fuzzy thinking, and clarity is what is really looked after. Here we're trying to ask simple questions to get simple answers. But we take some of the hardest issues known to man and woman. And one of the toughest is, what the heck happened at the Capitol 10 or so days ago? Our nation's capital. Was it a protest? Was it a coup? Was it an insurrection? Are these seditionists? Are these good patriots coming and what the heck happened? Why did it happen? And did anyone know that it was going to happen? And I guess the deepest part is what's going to happen from here. With me to speak of this is a person I have admired for a little bit. Now I'll have him explain himself a little further. Is Mr. Powers. Tyrone Powers has had a stellar career. In one of his lives, he was an FBI agent and was good at doing that. He's gone on from there to do all kinds of stuff. I am grateful that somehow the river led him to this place here, or was it a creek if it had to do with me, country boy that I am. So the creek led him here, but we are going to discuss what happened at the Capitol. Let me give you the overview. I don't even know the numbers. You had to be more than 10,000 people on the streets bum rushing the Capitol, one of the most secure buildings in the world. And just walked into it like you would walk into a child's dollhouse. And some said they were led, some said all kinds of stuff, but they went in there and man, they had fun while they were up here. They tore down things. They was taking stuff home, the speaker's podium, all kinds of stuff. Secure areas that may have been discussing points to help you, the citizen, navigate the taxes or whatever. They taking documents, moving stuff around. Then it stopped being so much fun. We saw an agent, a officer of the law, pinned against a wall, screaming for his life. We heard that a citizen, a woman in this case, was shot to death. Another officer, perhaps dealing with trauma, took his own life, and several officers were hospitalized. One, I'm told, was beat over the head with a fire extinguisher. My friends, this looks like sedition to me. And I'll say it, if they were Black Lives Matter, they would have never made it to the front lawn. They would have been gunned down at the front lawn. They still would be shooting at those bodies. I mean, a week later, they wouldn't be finished with them. There's something wrong here that we need to look at it. But enough of me. Mr. Powers, Brother Powers, would you be kind enough to help these people explain to these people, who are you? And then why don't you tell us what the heck happened at the Capitol the other day?
Yeah, well, thank you, Senator, for having me on. It's a pleasure to be on with you, and I'm appreciative of this opportunity. And this is a significant time in our history, and certainly from my background. I was a state trooper first, and then I was a special agent with the FBI, working a little bit of everything from foreign counterintelligence to counterterrorism to organized crime to white collar crime to the Violent Crime Task Force. I am left there, taught at American University of Washington, D.C., earned my PhD, taught at a college here, community college, and also started a Homeland Security and Criminal Justice Institute at that college where we train police officers. Did some work here in Baltimore City with the mayor's office. Now I'm doing work across the country with police agencies involving training and expert witness on use of force cases for juries and for judges, consulting with state's attorneys across the nation about de-escalation skills and how to make policing better, bringing a gulf between the policing community and the training of police officers based on how we recruit them. And obviously of late, based on a number of incidents, I've been working with a number of, did some terrorism training for some transportation agencies and have been participating and discussing and analyzing these events and helping people do everything from criminal justice reform to policing reform to security, putting security in place to prevent essentially what we saw on last week, which was quite remarkable. As a special agent in the FBI working counterintelligence and counterterrorism, the whole goal, the whole philosophy was preparation. And they always reminded us, even in the FBI Academy, there was a difference, because even after you finish the academy, you go into work counterintelligence or counterterrorism, and you go back for some special courses. But they always would say that, you know, preparation and paranoia both start with a P, but you should always be prepared and always anticipate the greatest breach or the greatest catastrophe and be prepared for that and then bring it down from there. So it was quite shocking and surprising as to the lack of security last week. Obviously, you had the Capitol Police under the instruction of some leadership, maybe in the hierarchy of the Capitol Police or otherwise, moved the barriers back. They had been further out during the Black Lives Matter rebellion and protests over there. They had been further out. These were moved closer to the Capitol. The presence that they would normally have, especially considering that not only had you had the threat of protest, but you also had this significant event going on inside the Capitol with that people had talked about being contested, the counting of the Electoral College votes and the finalizing of that stage. Usually you have extra protection in place. In an event like that, you almost treat it from a security standpoint like we do now with the Super Bowl and the NBA Finals and the World Series, because we already know that terrorist organizations around the world have targeted those events because they would have a large audience. And obviously terrorism needs an audience to be effective. And so the type of security that is put in place for those events, the structure, the setup, the surveillance, the tasking of assets or informants to let us know if they hear any chatter, even increasing the work of the NSA in terms of chatter and telephone calls to see what was a real threat and what's not a real threat, the monitoring of social media. All those things usually lead to a more robust security at events like this, at the inauguration and so on and so forth. And the lack of that is just remarkable and telling. And I think by the end of this investigation, Senator, as they begin to look at what happened here, there are going to be a lot more people involved. I know the FBI has said that they called the Capitol Police and asked them that they needed assistance. Well, I can tell you that doesn't make any logical sense, because during the time that I was in the FBI, we never asked permission from any federal agency or local agency in order to do what we needed to do, especially when it involved national security. So the mere fact that they said they called them and the Capitol Police didn't need any assistance is silliness in and of itself, because you don't call and ask them in a national security matter. So those things will have to be looked at. What happened? Because recall, after September 11th, 2001, the 9/11 Commission came out with their report, and two of the major aspects they said that led to that was a failure of communication and a failure of imagination. Mm-hmm. And so since that time, all the federal agencies communicate with each other. There's a fusion center in Washington, D.C. that puts the different federal agencies in close proximity to each other in the same building so they can consistently communicate about any threats and respond accordingly based on the expertise of that agency, whether you need to deploy the ATF or the FBI, whether you need to deploy military intelligence, whether you need to put drones up in the sky, whether you need to send in National Guard or the 82nd Airborne, whatever you need to do, there is a constant and consistent vigilance, not so much just because of all of the chatter and the threats that we were getting with this particular situation, but there's a constant vigilance post 9/11 because there is a strong belief and some credible information that there's still outside groups interested in targeting the United States and especially Washington, D.C. So you already have the structure and the apparatus in place. So something went horribly wrong. And there's a lot of people, and it wasn't just a matter of incompetence. There's a lot of people who made some decisions that left the Capitol vulnerable that this long-term investigation will have to look at.
Well, sir, I think that we'll slow it down for just a second and try to piece this one together, such as who did all of this. Now, in right-wing media, they are saying that this was Antifa, that this was, several Antifa led all these good people astray, and Antifa did this somehow. So I guess the first question is, who was involved in this? Then we can speak of who on the other side opened the door, if you wish, and let them in, or what were the facts that led to the breach. But I guess first things first, who was this? Was this Antifa, sir?
Well, we don't, I think that'll be part of the investigation. I think you definitely had some people in there who professionally wanted to harm people. Obviously, you had the people with the flex cuffs already on their belt. You had people with pipe bombs and with an intention of putting them in certain locations, and they actually didn't differentiate. They put one outside of the offices of the Republicans and outside of the offices on the wing of the Democrats. So that took some planning. That took some thought process of how am I going to get these things into DC? And then remarkably, how am I going to get them past security? Because the security apparatus in place is designed to deter and detect that. Along with that, though, even there is some organization and structure to this, no doubt about it. I think that the key will be to find out who did that, whether it was Antifa, whether it was one of the militia organizations. But beyond that, there was a whole group of people who Antifa or whatever other organization that they may find out was involved didn't tell to do what they did. For example, you had police officers there who were off duty, who were going over there, who actually breached the Capitol, knowing that's a breaking and entering. So you have these other people, so that even if it's orchestrated and led by some entity, if we come to find that out, there's still the people who went there, the people who were motivated by the president to go down. They actually participated in this beyond structure and organization. Some of the things they did had nothing to do with the structure and the organization. And the breaches in the beginning, some of the people who were up front, we know it for a fact now did not belong to any organized group. They may have been encouraged, they may have been pushed, they may have been structured, and they may have been amongst them to do even greater damage, which very well could have been done in this particular situation. But here's the other thing. But since the concern and since the statements by the president and others that Antifa was involved in other protests and then the FBI and the intelligence agencies should have been and would have been, I can tell you factually, monitoring their movement. So they would have known whether they were moving towards Washington, D.C., whether they were going to be a part of the group. And then based on that and based on the allegations and the information they had from past situations, they should have put some things in place. I know the Capitol Police Chief resigned, have a new or interim leader or chief of the Capitol Police. We've had the Sergeant of Arms resign in both houses. But there's some other people who are going to have to answer to this. And again, like I said, it's going to be other federal agencies. This has to be a more broad-based investigation because the lack of security again, no matter who was coming, whether it was a planned and organized and structured attack, or whether it was a group of people motivated, emotional, determined, either way, the structure and the security for stopping that is essentially the same. You put people in place, you put drones in the air. I talk about in my book that I wrote years ago about the security that was in place for the Million Man March. And that was years ago that took place, and how they had snipers on the roof, how they used the Nighthawk, which is the FBI helicopter that you can barely hear, so you won't even know if it's in place, how they had put people, agents in amongst the crowd, how they had surveillance cameras everywhere from the souvenir stands to the buildings and so on and so forth in anticipation. And that was certainly, there was no indication that there was going to be any violence at that particular event, but the structure was put in place. At this particular event, there was plenty of information from social media posts, from word of mouth, from intelligence sources that this was going to be violent, and yet these things were not properly put in place. And again, you can't reduce that to the sergeant of arms of both houses. You can't reduce that to the Capitol Police, because the whole infrastructure of Washington, D.C. is supposed to be under extra protection post 9/11. The Department of Homeland Security, which didn't even exist before September 11, 2000, is now in existence. And their job, Homeland Security, one of their major places of protection is Washington, D.C. And the Department of Homeland Security, with its 22 agencies, should have been on alert and put some things in place to keep this from happening. And so a lot of questions have to be asked of people, not only in positions of those officers who made, and we saw in some cases where they actually let people in, but in the leadership. What wasn't put in place, what strategically wasn't put in place, and what was allowed based on, to an extent, based on the president of the United States seeing this as his group. If it wasn't his group, as we saw before, when he had the place cleared so he could walk over to the church, then there was a different reaction and a different protection, and it was very effective. But were certain individuals in positions of power reluctant to put the required, prepared, and structured security apparatus in place because of the president of the United States?
Interesting. I'm going to get out of my lane for a moment, sir, and I'm going to jump into your lane. And later on, you could tell me I do better. Don't quit my day job. I understand. But I have been studying the ultra right since the 80s. I'm very familiar with the ADL, Southern Poverty, and several other centers. And I am a student of theirs. I read and watch and all of this stuff. I've been studying these guys. I also read right-wing stuff. So I am not the least guy familiar with it. I would contend that this doesn't fit the MO of Antifa at all. That this is, and the Antifa, for the audience, of course, stands for anti-fascist. That this, the anti-fascist leading fascist scenario is either the fascists are incredibly stupid and, I don't know, 50 Antifa members can lead 10,000 to do incredible stuff. That's they'd have to be extremely stupid to allow a handful of people to lead them to such depravity, to such extremes. It's not really likely. I mean, they did find a member, not even and Antifa, of course, doesn't have leaders in the traditional sense. They found call him a leading member, if you wish, but he claims that he was there as a journalist. And it makes a lot of sense where you want to, if you're anti-fascist, you want to know what the fascists are doing. It makes a lot of sense that he's documenting, and nobody has been able to come up with videos showing him leading these guys. So I would suggest to you that we're really dealing with a different phenomenon, and I'm gonna go a step further and name some of the names um, that I would argue that the majority of the crowd was uh, gullible, innocent, flexible. Let's use it that way. That in their minds, they are there to protest against stopping the steal. They are there to demand that America is taken back, etc. I would argue that perhaps 80% of them had no idea that they were about to take over the Capitol and all kinds of stuff, that the crowd instinct took over. Now, all of this was aided and abetted by the president, but deeper still, not just aided, he whipped them into a frenzy. It didn't take much, but because the folk who came were already frenzied. But he whipped them further and gave them their marching orders that march down here, I will lead you. And of course, he was long gone as soon as he said that, but well, one step at a time. As a Marine, we believe in leading from the front, but he never claimed to be a Marine. But all right, let's ignore that. So I would argue that the majority of the people had no idea what they would end up doing. Perhaps 80% or more had no idea. But there are groups among them that wanted to go further. And some of them are not that hard to find. There's groups like, of course, the world famous Proud Boys that we now know, who are not as vicious as some of these other folk that we're going to name. They're up there. The Proud Boys, several of the militia movements that certainly are going deeper, and a group called the 3%. All of these other groups certainly intended to get in there and take over the Capitol. But there are other groups deeper, far, who view these three groups as not willing to go as far. And these are the groups that put up a gallows up there and had their ties. That guy and folk like who created the gallows and had the hand ties. I don't want to tell the FBI their job, but my God, press those guys because they came prepared. They knew that this was going to happen. This was their goal. And they were prepared, I would argue, to have some type of show trial and perhaps use that gallows on members of Congress, on the Senate. Now, to those, the real hard right, they view the Democrats and the Republicans as the problem. The Democrats more of the problem, but the Republicans too. They view these guys as a problem. And these senators and congressmen who are playing with these fellas, they may find themselves at that gallows talking about, I'm one of you. And that's not a good place to try to convince people. We who have had a history of being lynched in this country is not a good place to try to convince people to be Christian or civil or whatever else. In terms of the government itself, the governmental response, I would do the same. I would say that 75% of this is going to be ineptitude. It's going to be ineptitude of being overwhelmed. You prepare for X and A. If you prepare for A and you got the rest of the alphabet, now what do you do? And we don't know. But I would look at that 25% of conscious decision. Most of those decisions will be innocent enough in the sense of they were just bad, stupid decisions. but there was more than enough intelligence, more than enough, an overwhelming amount of intelligence out there to say that this was going to happen. So much intelligence that me, a layperson, is picking up, and it's not even picking up. It's just you couldn't keep your eyes shut. There was so much stuff. So the question becomes, how conscious was the other side? Most of that is going to be bad decision making, but some of this, what percentage we can argue, but some of this is going to be because these guys are seen as friendlies. These guys, the ultra right is seen as friendlies. We share the same basic philosophy. Are there just like that guy in that Wisconsin, the young man walking around with a rifle, is shooting people? He's seen as a friendly. He's here to help us out, and the other guys are the problem. This is Black Lives Matter, and folk like that are seen as the enemy, if you wish. And these are the friendlies, the good old boys come to town, and we have a whole different standard. I'll take a selfie. I'll take that way's the way in. Don't walk on the lawn, walk over there. And that may have changed, as I conclude and let you get a word in edgewise, that may have changed with the killing of the Capitol officers, with the beating and all of these things of the Capitol officers, where these guys that I named, there's those to the right of the 3%, the Proud Boys and the militia movement. These guys see all of these officers as some demonic plot, and they'll even use Trump. They don't care much about him either. In their minds, they are absolute seditionists and want to move all of this into the race war that they dream of and work towards doing. All right, sir, I'll take a drink, and you got enough to bite into. What do you think of that?
No, I think it's a great analysis. I do think that these groups, we know they do their homework. When I worked domestic counterterrorism or counterterrorism in general, they do their homework. And so what I mean by that is they understand the psychology of a particular crowd. And they understand that the opportunity, they come prepared because the opportunity may in fact present itself for them to carry it to the next level: pipe bombs, rifles, flex cuffs, so on and so forth. So it's not that they go there and say, well, we are going to lead the crowd. They anticipate and understand when you have a group of people who feel that they are severely wrong, and you have a president who have consistently used the rhetoric that he has used over the last 4 years. When you have that, they understand, based on their study of the behavioral sciences, the people who are in that small percentage of people who are with these groups who hope to take advantage of it and hope to elevate and motivate the others to be more violent. They understand that. There's no doubt about it. When I was a special agent in the FBI, one of the things we had to do in order to, in the intelligence unit, working domestic terrorism or counterintelligence, is to read the books that had promoted people to gather as crowds throughout history. For example, Adolf Hitler's Mein Kampf, which is my story, because the philosophy was, how does a 5'4", 5'6" guy come out of prison and lead the world to war? What philosophy did? So they understand the psychology of moving people to the next level, to do things that we couldn't imagine that they would do. And so they don't go, they go there, they understand that, they do their homework. I always said that. They consistently taught us that in the FBI Academy. I always consistently said that evil people are better at being evil than good people are at being good, because they actually practice and study that. So they very well might have taken advantage of their studies, that when we get this crowd there, and if in fact the president and others give the fiery speeches that we anticipate, because he said I'm gonna speak, they saw the setup, then this is what we're going to do, and this is how it's going to move. Mirror that with the fact that there's some indication from investigation now that Some people were even given a walk-in tour of the Capitol building the day before this happened by congressmen. So now you've got a little bit of strategy involved. So all these other people who came, but let me add this to it though. The reality of the matter is they do understand behavior and so on and so forth. But what's really interesting with this particular case is, along with that crowd, you had off-duty police officers who came from across the country who know better, who know not to be led by any of these groups into this particular situation, who know not to hurt fellow police officers and so on and so forth. And so it may have been the perfect storm. You're absolutely right. The majority of the people probably didn't go there with that intention, but they're still responsible because the reality of the matter, and these groups anticipate that. They anticipate that wherever they go. They anticipate what will take this thing in another direction, what will allow us access so that we can do the more violent things with the pipe bombs and so on and so forth that we want to do. And they go there with that in mind. And the crowd, the group of people there, or the leadership who bring people there, have to be the ones to say, no, we're not doing that. And we understand there are those amongst us who are leading us in that particular direction. On the flip side of that, you talked about the friendlies, the police officers and so on and so forth. At the same time that these groups anticipate psychologically, we know they do their study. We've done raids on their locations and we found the Turner Diaries, we found the Art of War, we found Frantz Fanon. But even if they don't believe in the philosophy, they look at the strategies. We found Che Guevara's On Guerrilla Warfare. So we found libraries in the places of these people who take advantage of larger groups. I say they're 10%, and the group is 90%, and then they know how to do that because they've looked at history and done their research. On the other hand, the people in the intelligence agencies, whether it be the FBI or the ATF, or hopefully the Capitol Police, also have to understand that this is part of the scenario and a possibility, and you put security in place. There is the possibility that on my police force, on the Capitol Police, there are friendlies who agree with whatever the speaker, whether it's the president or someone else is spewing, who agree with that. And they have to take control of that up front. They have to draw a bright yellow line. In the FBI, for example, when the FBI have, my whole issue when I first went into the FBI, family pushed back because of the antagonistic relationship that the FBI had with the Black community, whether it was COINTELPRO or the assassinations that were involved in here internationally and the other things that they were intimately involved in. But here's what I can say about them. They understand the psychology of even their people and that there might be friendly. So when I was working in the FBI, I talk about this in my book, there were people who hated Bill Clinton, but they never got to the point because of the leadership and because the FBI wanted to establish a certain reputation where they would go across the line. So the leadership understood that I may have some friendlies at a lower level, and I need to draw a bright yellow line and say, no matter how you feel, I may feel the same way with you. This is the brand. This is what we do as the brand. This is the agency. So if you are the head of the Capitol Police and you know the possibility of friendlies taking selfies or friendlies maybe directing or allowing people in, then you plan for that. You put your best supervisors. You put your best people. You draw a bright yellow line before the event and says, this cannot happen. No matter how you feel, we will march for the protection and the security of this building, no matter how we feel, because we are professionals today. So you have to anticipate that as you head these organizations. And this is the important, and as you know, Senator, well, you greatly know better, even more so than I, that's what leadership has to do. Leadership cannot just see the world through the eyes of the leader. They have to see the world through the eyes of all of those they're leading. And they might say through their eyes, there may be some friendlies out there. So I need to put the right supervisors in place. I need to draw a bright yellow line. I need to make this clear before the event, not during the event or trying to explain it after the event. Because if it goes wrong, whether my people decided to be friendly towards whatever was happening, one way, I am ultimately responsible. So that is the key to what the agency should have done. The friendly, so they should have put that in order and in check. That's why this investigation has to lead us to those particular people who made those decisions or didn't make the decisions to put the appropriate people in place and draw the bright yellow line or to move the barrier out? Who made the decision to move the barrier closer to the Capitol? Who made the decision not to have the National Guard standing on the steps as they were with the Black Lives Matter protesting? Who made those decisions? And the officers, whether they were young or experienced on the front line, you have to anticipate that there may be some who want to go the other way. You have to anticipate that in every agency. In the police agencies in which I do training with, I say to them consistently, police officers should join the police department because they want to protect and serve the people. But we absolutely know that that's not necessarily true. Some of them have control issues. They were bullied as young children. They're being bullied at home. And now all of a sudden you give them a badge and a gun and now they're in a bullying position. You already know there's some people on your force that have that philosophy. So as the leader of that force, you can't necessarily fire them, but you can control them by drawing bright yellow lines and putting supervisors in place to control that particular behavior. As I tell officers all the time, I'm not trying to change your heart. I think Dr. King said that too. He said, I'm not trying to make America love me. I'm just trying to keep it from lynching me. So I tell officers, I'm not trying to change your heart today, but I do need to change your behavior if you're going to work for this agency. And that's the kind of decisions, the bright yellow line that had to be put in place that wasn't put in place, that allowed officers to think it was okay to take selfies, that allow officers to move the barrier back, that allow officers to direct people in certain directions until, as you indicated so clearly, and you are certainly on point, when one of them, when they begin to get hurt, and now it becomes us against them philosophy, and them become everyone who's not in uniform. Up to that, I may have been friendly with them, but now I'm under attack. Now I've got an officer running up the step trying to beat back a crowd with a baton. Now I'm wondering why, as they push through the door, officers are not firing shots over their head. We talked about before, you can't shoot them in the leg, but as soon as they heard gunshots, that place began to clear out one way or the other. Now I'm wondering why those supervisors with that skill set, former Marines who are always a part of these agencies, tactical people. When I was in the FBI, we had Marines, we had lawyers, we had everyone. Why now, if I, as a supervisor and a leader, why not put them in strategic positions in anticipation of these things happening, understanding the psychology of human beings? As I said before, you know better than I do that in a leadership position, it's not just about how you see it. You got to anticipate how everybody, your constituents see it, how the people who work for you see it. You know your people well enough to know who's going to show up, who's not going to be there, who you can assign what to, and how you're going to assign them. And that's and you may not fire them, but your skill set in these leadership positions allow you to understand the behavior. So the small group of organizations that would go to Washington, D.C. in anticipation of breaching the Capitol and having to have studied the psychology of the people who were going there, had studied their emotion, had studied the buildup over the last 5 years. These people study. They're not just, don't go with the philosophy that they're just rednecks and people who are, these people study, right? Because the history of the world indicates that to us. And as we were trained in the FBI Academy, you know, just because you are not right doesn't mean you are not smart, right? Just because you're evil doesn't mean you're not strategic. You may be strategically evil. You may, in fact, be an evil genius. So you have to anticipate that. And I think that's what the agencies that did not provide the proper security are going to have to address the people in leadership positions that didn't draw the bright yellow line or didn't strategically put people in place to prevent this. And on the other hand, as you said, and not a whole lot of planning, not everyone there was part of some structured organization, but we have to anticipate that those people are going to be in the crowd. History teaches us that, whether we're dealing with domestic terrorism, whether we're dealing with the Ku Klux Klan, whether we're dealing with the civil rights movement, when there are people who threw rocks at windows that had nothing to do with King and the marches, but was just trying to take it in another direction. We have to anticipate that, plan for that, prepare for that, and then we can prevent events like this from occurring.
Well, well put, sir. I've seen so much stuff, and I too do not understand why the officers of the day, the folk there, did not act in a full exercise of their duties. I mean, they had sidearms. When a crowd or individuals become personally threatening to you in your life and limb, or the safety of Congress. They had every right to use their, in fact, it was not even a right. They had responsibility and obligation to use it. And if I had been there personally, a lot of these Confederates would have gone to see Robert E. Lee. They would have to explain to Robert E. Lee why they were being silly. But that's why I'm not there, and that's why I'm here. God is good. Now,
there is a difference, Senator, between a peaceful protest, the first right to petition the government. Everyone should be able to do that. But when you charge the building, you start breaking out windows, when you are squeezing or crushing officers, then even the major Supreme Court case, which to an extent I have a slight disagreement with, but O'Connor versus Graham, which is the standard now that says if an officer believes that his life or the lives of others are in imminent threat of death or serious bodily harm, they can use deadly force if necessary. That's a Supreme Court ruling. And the fact of the matter is, with an officer being squeezed, with these people at the door, with windows being broken, with them running down the hall, with police officers trying to beat back people back with a baton, and they still charging to them, that meets that threshold set by the Supreme Court of the United States. Now, again, I understand, and we might say on another day that the police officers had remarkable restraint, that not more people were hurt, not more people were killed. The lady who was shot, that they didn't hurt more people. But they were so outnumbered. And this is what I mean by preparation, because the fact of the matter is, as the groups that would motivate and encourage these people to breach so that they could go in and plant the pipe bombs and do the other things that they need to do, so that it can be a frenzy, kind of like a lynch mob that we've seen back in the day where you saw crowds standing around a person who were being hung from a tree, the whole lynch mob, if they were not participating, at least being close enough to watch and not stop the proceedings. If we anticipate that, because we do know that, I'm telling you from my training, we do know that that's what happens with crowds. And we do know that they show of force, the National Guard, whether they're armed or are not armed, standing on the Capitol in a military formation is a deterrence. As you know, Senator, one of the beautiful things about the uniforms is that they are deterrent in and of themselves. If Marines look sharp, people say, wow, that's a Marine. I'm not going to challenge them. So sometimes, even if you don't have the greater numbers, the whole presentation that we're willing to do whatever we have to do to protect this Capitol is enough to deter most people and prevent those people who are trying to orchestrate a breach so they can do greater damage to back up. Deterrence is a major effect. During the course of this, leading up to this inauguration, as they prepare for this, they've got military vehicles over there. They've got planes in the air. You know, the Naval Academy is relatively close to Washington, D.C. Those choppers, as you're familiar with, that makes the noise in and of itself. The noise in and of itself says, this is something you don't want to deal with. And having them fly, all of that is being put into place as a deterrence. Could have very well, some of those things, not necessarily all of them, but you were already planning for an inauguration, so you weren't that far out of having the resources to put this in place, could have acted as a deterrent. And some of those people who were brave because of the lack of a deterrence, the lack of resistance, would have not entered that building if you put that in place. It's their fault for what they did. I don't care if 5% of the people were trying to do something greater and push this crowd for doing this, you still made the decision to join. And like I said before, some of them were police officers. Some of them were professionals, we know now. Some of them were, and you're gonna find out more and more where these people came from. Some of them wore suits and ties. One of them was a legislator. A legislator who so these people knew better. So it's not just that they built me up to this frenzy and I had to go, you are a legislator. You are a police officer. You know what breaking and entering looked like for anybody's house, much less the Capitol of the United States. So you should be, out of all the people, helping to calm the crowd down, even as you participate in your First Amendment right of a peaceful protest. So all of that has to be looked at. All of that has to be addressed, and I hope we do not address it in a superficial manner, that we address this in a thorough manner get the answers we want, because I'm telling you, in many of these cases, when I was doing investigations and went out to interview people, there was skill set of some people, especially when I was doing police corruption or public corruption. The skill set of some of these people, the dexterity and their ability to make it sound like they're right and you're wrong, we can't allow that to happen. We've got to have the experts say, you know, for a fact, this is the training you get. You know, this is what should have happened. You know, this is what you should have anticipated. We know the legal restrictions. Again, I've seen some agents who I used to work with now on television saying, well, you know, we've been restricted from doing those kind of things because we were being so intrusive. But the fact of the matter is, under national security, all of those things that you have prevented from doing, you can actually do. The threat to national security eliminates a lot of those things. So those conversations doesn't make sense. But I've seen them have these conversations with people in the media, and the people in the media say, yeah, well, that makes sense. No, it doesn't make sense. So the people who questions these people about their actions or lack thereof of actions have to have knowledge to say this is not true. And let me tell you why. Things like the Oklahoma City bombing says that we can take certain actions if we have certain information, so we never end up like that again. Things like Waco, things like Ruby Ridge, all of these things, they set limitations, but they also said for the purpose of national security, things like what happened on September the 11th, things that the terrorist attacks that have happened since then, and other countries like Paris and so on and so forth, when they had information, but still allow restaurants to be set up. There is a limitation. There are legal restrictions because the agencies historically have gone too far. But there is also national security. And an attack on Congress at the time when they are finalizing an election is certainly a national security event.
Well, I know this, sir, Brother Powers. I know that any Marine who would have allowed this attack without drawing a firearm and firing a shot would be drummed out of the Marine Corps, would have been drawn up on charges, and the best you could hope for is that they just kick you out of the Marine Corps. And the worst, you would have been breaking rocks in Leavenworth. You would have been breaking big rocks into little rocks. And you get out when you can make them big again. And we would just, a breach of this, and I mean, the breach, Marines go through breaches. I mean, you know, things happen, but you didn't fire a shot.
Right.
There's not a Marine around that we get mad at what happened in Lebanon.
Right.
When there was a truck bombing and the Marines on duty had been forbidden to have bullets in their guns.
Right.
On the ground in the Marines, we laugh at that and we say we would have had bullets. Well, better to be judged by 12 than to be carried by 6.
Right.
On the ground. Now, the police allowing this, it's just unfathomable, unpardonable, and should be looked at. Let me take you to 3 different points and an interesting article, sir. You really got to get this one. And I forgot who wrote it, but it's out now. A writer is writing and saying, are we witnessing the birth of an American Hezbollah? Is the Republican Party, he's naming it by name, as its future constituting, going to have an armed wing, a group of the Republican Party that believes that the America's been taken over, and they will act as the pressure for the Democrats or others. If you don't redo these elections or do the elections right, or is that white? I get a little confused. If you don't do it the white way, we will unleash the crazies on you. No, the crazies. We will unleash our military force on you. The writer in that article on the American Hezbollah, and they don't really understand the Hezbollah well, but that's all right. Let's take that for a moment. Their basic theme of an armed wing of a Republican Party. The writer is saying that the true Republicans have three choices. They can accept this, they can raise their voices inside the party, or they should have an exit strategy and perhaps create their own party, which is interesting. My second point, and then I turn it 3 points. My second point is that we should have been preparing for this many years. Since the late 70s, Louis Beam, one of the leading terrorists of his day, came up with the idea of what is known as leaderless resistance.
Right.
Leaderless resistance, where they say in order to deal with the FBI and all these other agencies, we're not going to have a single leader. We're going to have what we now know as lone wolves. We're going to, you and your 5 friends, you and the people, several people you trust, y'all are in charge of doing these things. Now, my last point is, and please answer, the real question becomes, what percent of the right wing is willing to do the sedition, the madness? Now, 75 million people around voted for Trump. That gives us an idea of how big this group is, or the right wing, if you wish. Now, what percent would you say are the true believers who are saying enough talk, time to take this country back, time to start the white bastion or whatever, get back the Confederacy? There's all kinds of groupings among them. What percent of this 75 million are we speaking about?
Wow. I obviously I haven't done the research, but I would say a relatively small amount, 5 to 10%. But let me say that the whole angst, Trump has this, obviously, with the election, the people who voted for him, the people who came out to his particular rallies and so on and so forth. He has a group of people. But on the other hand, the other thing that why I say the agencies could have anticipated this too, based on what you're saying, is that we're in the midst of a pandemic. People are out of work. Mm-hmm. People are in a mental crisis. People are upset about things that have nothing to do with the presidency, but here's a thing that he's giving you something. If you need to be angry about something because you've been shut in, you've been unemployed, the money's not getting out to you, which is not the fault of the Democrats, maybe, the president and the whole battle with the relief, all of that came together in a perfect storm. People had to have the time to go to Mississippi, to be off, to go to Mississippi, to go to Washington, D.C., and to go back to check in the hotels. We got to look at all of that. What was the hotel rates that allowed so many people to be able to afford it in the first place during this particular time, based on what's going on now? So there's a lot of factors. So I think there's a small percentage, and the agencies kind of already knew about that on the left and on the right. The Michigan militia, the people who, again, the Oklahoma City bombing and Timothy McVeigh coming out of the Michigan militia. The mayor of Detroit at that time, Coleman Young, refused to put gun legislation into effect in the city of Detroit, because even prior to what happened in Oklahoma City, he's the mayor, an African-American mayor, who came out and said, I will not disarm a city of Black people who are surrounded by the Michigan militia. I mean, he said this back in the 80s and in the 90s. He already understood that these groups exist and what they were willing to do, what they weren't willing to do when they approached certain amount of deterrence. So I think that their numbers were I don't want to say they grew because there's a difference between growing and swelling. Swelling means it's infected. So I think their numbers swell. I think they had an infection, and their numbers, the anger, the willingness to go, the lack of having anything else to do because we're in the middle of a pandemic, the angst, the mental illness issues, or the mental health issues that we're dealing with this took people who were on the fence and took them over the fence with these particular groups. And these groups understood this maybe more so than most of us. The agency should have understood this because it's part of, as you know, it's part of an intelligence analysis. Not only do you look at the human terrain, but you look at the environment. And when we do intelligence analysis of other countries, we look at the food they eat, we look at their socialization, we look at the school system, we look at if they're in a depression or if their economy is doing well, because these are the people that you will be able to recruit as your informants, as your assets to give you the information based on the total environment. And so these people who the percentage, relatively small percentage, who are able to swell their numbers, infect other people with this virus, swell their numbers, did so in the midst of a real virus, which helped this thing explode more too. But again, on the other side, those who are in those agencies have to say, it's going to be more people coming here than usual. People are going to be angry. They're going to have a short fuse. They're already angry about money. They're already dealing with COVID. They already have been shut in. And here is the opportunity. And these groups are going to take advantage of that. So you have to know the opposite thing too. These groups always have existed. We know that. Again, from Ruby Ridge to Waco to all these things, because Timothy McVeigh said he acted in retaliation for what the FBI did at Waco. That's why he did what he did in Oklahoma City. So we already know that. We've done that particular research. But their numbers usually do not swell to this proportion and cannot be taken advantage of as the way we saw in the Capitol unless there's a perfect storm. And right now there is a perfect storm. And that's what intelligence analysis and security evaluation is about. Not just how do I secure this building, but what is the threat like today? The threat today may be different from the threat last week before last. The threat in 2020 going into 2021 may be different because of all these other factors that we've been witnessing, the increased suicide rate. I mean, if I'm willing to kill myself, then why not go to Washington, D.C. and throw myself at the police? You have to factor in all those things. And it's the agency's responsibility, intelligence agencies, and preparation of their security to take that into consideration. But on the other hand, it's the people like these fringe groups who are able to swell their numbers because they take that into consideration and play on that. And it resulted in one group that either wasn't prepared by choice or by incompetence. We'll get to the answer sooner or later. And another group who said, we're going to take full advantage of this and then we're going to run and hide. We're going to disappear. And if they get charged, if they get convicted, if they go to prison, that's a casualty of war.
We are lucky, we as a country are very lucky that the other side was so inept, that these militia and all these fascist groups were so inept. If they would have been better, the damage that they could have caused under those conditions. I mean, nobody checking for weapons. They're all just, the stuff that they could have done. We are fortunate as a country that I think their success shocked them.
Yeah, I think that's exactly what they not only were inept, they were surprised by the lack of resistance. And they kept anticipating that the cavalry must be around the corner. The cavalry must be on that building. The cavalry must be coming soon. And the more and more and they had to go back and do it over again. They was got this far. But here's the other thing, Senator, that I think is important to mention almost as an aside, but not as an aside. You have the FBI, who usually, even if they disagree with the president, Democrat or Republican, will march for the president no matter what.
Yes.
This president have created such an antagonistic relation. There's so much confusion. And he's questioned the intelligence agencies on their Russian investigation. He criticized and condemned directors, called them out of their names. Usually, even you can go back in history and verify this. a president of the United States, the last apparatus that he attacked is the intelligence, because they can even get intelligence on him.
Oh,
so he's
sure.
usually fearful.
J. Edgar. Sure.
J. Edgar Hoover stayed in power for so long was because he threatened every single president with their secrets if they got rid of him. That's why he became director in the 1920s and stayed director till he dropped dead in his bedroom in the 1970s. And then after that, Congress said, from this point forward, director of the FBI can only serve 10 years because that's a powerful position if you have all the secrets. The director of the CIA can only serve 10 years because we learned from Hoover what could happen. Usually that relationship is a lot different. The agents, no matter whether they believe in Trump or not, just hated the way he denigrated their institution. They're not using the intelligence, denying the intelligence, condemning the FBI for being part of the people who were helping Hillary Clinton. You usually don't have that much of an antagonistic relationship because presidents are usually intelligent enough to know that if I don't need anyone else, I need the CIA and the FBI and the military on my side. Everybody else, I like to get their votes and all, but in order to maintain my power, this is for the first time that I've seen that you actually have an overt, sometimes you have a covert disagreement in the intelligence agencies, but you have an overt antagonism between the president of the United States and the agencies that the president usually rely on the most, even for their own protection. The Secret Service, those agencies, even for their own protection. This president just went on his own and condemned everyone that didn't agree with him. And the intelligence agency said, this is not a political position for us. This is what we do as a profession. And like I said, the FBI has a history of being antagonistic against the African-American community. But look at what happened during that time. They weren't antagonistic against Nixon or Kennedy or Johnson or Carter or Ford or Reagan or Bush, because presidents understood that. This is such a unique situation, even within the intelligence community, even within the agencies that say, we don't agree with you, but we will march for you, right or wrong, and take it. In this particular case, they're saying, we would usually march for you, right or wrong, even if we don't, but now you attacking us. So how do we deal with that? That's a unique situation in the history of this nation that we cannot miss out on. That's the uniqueness of this presidency.
Well, in our unique last few minutes, I want you to answer a threefold question. Of course, I want to know what are first things first, you probably are aware of the ultra-right wing's call for a armed protest at every state capitol on January the 17th and beyond. And we're hearing that the real far right is saying, no, use it all on the inauguration. So there's division in their lunatic fringe. Then you have a call from some Republican leaders as no real investigation of what happened in the Capitol. Instead, what we need is unity and reconciliation. Let bygones be bygones. Enough of this. No, we all need that. Okay, that was then, this is now. Leave that alone, and all of us just join hands and march to the glorious future that awaits us. And then the civil libertarian in me wants to know, how do we make sure that the average citizen does not lose rights here? There's the pendulum is really strong. And when we see this, we may say the problem is that we had too many rights get in the way, and we just need to get rid of all of those things for right now, mind you, and then we'll get them back later. I'm just aware that government is not in the business of giving back rights.
That's right.
That whatever you lose from government, usually you lost it forever, or you're going to pay a heavy price to get it back. So I said, your thoughts on January 17th, your thoughts on unity and reconciliation, and how do we keep the rights of the American people?
Well, one, the agencies are under amazing scrutiny now, and they, to an extent, they're blaming each other, and some ego things are involved. So I think they will have proper things in place. I know for a fact right now they're monitoring who's checking in the hotels, things that, and this goes back to your civil liberties piece, they're monitoring who's checking in hotels, who's traveling this way, who's buying plane tickets, who's buying train tickets, who's stopping at rest areas, the things that historically have been done, how many people are moving this way, and then they are anticipating and putting things in place based on that, whether they just need the National Guard, or whether they need the 82nd Airborne on standby. So I think they're prepared this time to make a showing to the world, not even so much to the citizens of the United States, but to those organizations that would, because if you recall, during the course of this, chatter increased in China about going to war. Chatter increased in other countries because America, they felt, was destabilized. And this is the best time because we're focusing internally. So externally was the time for them to act out. I think all of that is being put into the minds of the people who will provide protection. So I think Washington, D.C. will be great. I think that the legislative and state houses will have a major show of force, because even when these groups call for armed resistance at the state houses, there are people who have arms and there are people who won't use them unless they have an advantage. And I think that the deterrent effect that governors should put in place in these different locations, bringing other people in. I know for a fact that, for example, here in DC, the Pentagon police, which usually just guard the Pentagon or just police the Pentagon area down there, are now being deployed to other places. I know that the intelligence agencies have canceled all leave, that they are tasking assets and informants, and they're sharing that information with local and state governments. That's why you hear governors saying whether they have credible information or do not. The fact of the matter is they do have information now, because the federal agencies are sharing more so than before. So I do think that there will be, now people could try something anywhere. There could be some people, there will be snipers in place, obviously, of Washington, D.C., because this is a world stage and the people are seeing how prepared we are to deal with this particular thing and how prepared we are to deal with it, whether it's domestically or whether it's some terrorist group from some international terrorist group or some country, because all terrorism is not orchestrated by these groups. Some of them are orchestrated from governments to look like groups. So how prepared are we to deal with that? The civil liberties things, I think, is a great concern. This is why I think we don't need new legislation, because every time there's a breach, whether it's 9/11 when we did the Homeland Security Act and the Patriot Act, and then you had to pull back from that, had to do Patriot Act 2, people are more likely to allow for legislation. I think that we have to ensure that there's no new legislation, that if you need to put extra security or surveillance in place, that you use the National Security Act, because it already has some restrictions and some natural dates when it has to end. You have to justify it every 30 days as to why we're going this far with surveillance and so on and so forth. What always is concerning is when we create new legislation to deal with situations that may be very temporary, not when we enact legislation that's already in effect with the limitations of a sunset clause or a 30-day review. Then I think we could do that. And I think that's what allays some of our fears about the loss of civil liberties if we do not allow in any state, in any locale, or in the federal government new legislation to be passed, but allow the national security legislation that already is in effect to be implemented in that same window that was created so that it did not get way out of control.
Well, Brother Powers, I'm going to allow you to have a last word, but of course I'm going to tell you what to say. You can speak, but I'll tell you what to say. I do want you to address two different audiences. What should Black people do at a time like this? What should they do? And what should the American people do? Now, yes, I'm clear. Blacks are Americans too. But I want to differentiate just so that we can fine tune an argument. Well, and then I'll give us our benediction.
Yeah, I think what we've said today has been abundantly clear. We have to read, analyze, and think more. And I think, Senator, this platform that you have, this podcast, providing this particular information people understanding that as a legislator, not only are you looking over legislation, but you're providing information, I think is key to our people. I think we have to read, analyze, think, and learn. Remember, the greatest tool that was used was not even chattel slavery to hold us back, was preventing us to read, keeping us out of school, keeping us from writing, keeping us from learning and analyzing, and keeping us from bringing our experts together, such as yourself. Thank you for having me on, and others, to walk our people through this. My grandmother used to say to me, and I know she was talking about Black people, but it applies to all people, that whenever I explain a concept from my area of expertise, or when I got my PhD, I used to pontificate. My grandmother used to tell me, son, can you stop a minute and pick that up? I said, what are you talking about, Grandma? She said, reach down and pick up your common sense, because when you got educated, you put the education on your head and drop. She said, make it plain when you talk to people. Walk them through this and people will get it. So I think what you are doing here on a regular basis, providing this particular information, is a way to help people. A lot of people in our community who are trying to make it from day to day, Black people we're talking about now, people of color, who don't necessarily have the time to read a full volume book, who don't understand, who don't have necessarily the time because they're trying to work. They're working 2 or 3 jobs, trying to keep a house, could appreciate a forum like you have here, Senator, going beyond the business of just a legislature and making sure that people have the information in a way that they can understand and get it without all the pontification. So I think we just have to read, analyze, think, and learn, and watch programs like this, prepare. I mean, we've got to watch what's going on around us. There's some other things I can say about preparation, but I won't get into them right now. But prepare to be able to protect yourself and your own family constitutionally. I've always said that before. Until America gets it right, I have to get it right, because I can't have people come in my home and hurt my children or rape my daughters. I have to be in a position where I don't want to hurt anyone, but I'm prepared to protect what is mine based on the reality of where we are. And I don't think that's a bad thing to say until things change and get better. And I would say that on a more a wider realm or broader realm for the American people. I mean, this thing of attacking the Capitol is an embarrassment to the entire world. It is an opening for every terrorist organization. Those of you who believe you're on one side or the other, who watch what happened with the World Trade Center and the Pentagon and the plane that went down in Pennsylvania and all the other attacks, have got to say, no, we got to at least do this a different way or a better way. I would say that to them. We got to do this because this is, I mean, I have someone to look to drag the Speaker of the House and the Vice President out is ridiculous. I mean, it's absolutely ridiculous. You got to be looking at people like Vladimir Putin, and he's saying that, wait a minute, we want to be more like them. You've got to look at the countries that we're talking about bringing democracy to, or we're a republic really, or bringing a republic form of government to, saying, and so if I do all of that, I can get to the point where we can do this. That's the future. We got to look at all of that and get rid of this nonsense. And for those fringe groups who take advantage of people's emotions to lead them into pure destruction, there are people now who are going to lose their jobs, and these people are going to go back and plan the next event. You got to think through that too. Who's leading you? What sense of that? What is your outcome objective? What did you intend to get out of that after all that was over? And what did you think was going to happen, considering the military apparatus of this particular country and the desire of this country to stay the United States of America, the #1 superpower in the world? And they don't really care whether you're the jackass or the elephant. They intend to make sure that this nation stay as it is. And so that's what I would say to the other people. Don't allow your emotions or others to use your emotions, to manipulate your emotions into your own destruction.
Well, sir, what is the name of your book again?
Eyes to My Soul, The Rise or Decline of a Black FBI Agent. And I just published the 25th anniversary edition of that book.
Has it been that long? Oh, my.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. I'm continuing to write.
Getting old.
Yeah.
I don't know what it says about me. I read it.
We don't have any other choice. If we don't get old, and we're going to die. So we got to keep getting old. We got to thank God for aging.
Well, absolutely. And we also thank God for having you on this show. Brother Powers, my name is Senator James Sanders Jr., and the show is called Let's Be Clear. And if you've ever heard an attempt to get through fuzzy thinking, You've heard it today's show where a lot of myths and garbage and weird stuff are floating around, but we took it on and we went point by point trying to give you some plain stuff, plain answers to complex questions. And that is what we do at Let's Be Clear. So the next show, I encourage you all, let's be clear. Thank you very much,
Thank you.
Thank you. God bless you.